we know that globally there was problems from the Americas all the way over into China.
Hmm.
They were talking about millions dying then of starvation and freezing in China. Um, the Mayan civilization just stopped everything for near 100 years. And even there's indications that people that, you don't think about historically, like in the Chaco Canyon, that's about the same time that they started laying block and building buildings to store grain. They didn't do that before. They were more of a hunter gatherer, nomadic thing. But all of a sudden, right after this period of starvation and extreme cold around the world, they started building basically grain silos. And we know from evidence of DNA at Chaco Canyon that the Mesoamerican people were moving up into North America trying to conquer new lands. Matter of fact, there's a place called Bluff, I believe it's Bluff, Utah, um, or maybe it's Blanding. Either way, there's a Chacoan city there, and everything they find there is Aztec, macaw feathers, from the pottery, the pipes, everything. So we know that the empires were moving around. And not only that, when you go into South America, you have several civilizations disappearing right about that time, like the Paracas people. That's the same time that the Nazca moved in and basically killed them. They killed them, and then they tried to take their area, but they didn't understand the farming techniques of the people before that. So they had a real rough time after that. But as far as like the whole Roman Byzantine issue, they were starving. Everybody was, very terrified. On top of that, nothing would grow. The bread wouldn't bake right. Like there was problems literally everywhere. I made a little short thing about it. They blame it on volcanic activity, but some of the ice cores indicate that maybe there was a cosmogenic trigger to it. So we,
Something the
we could have
sun
been
did.
bombarded by three or more things, like meteor
Yeah.
impacts, volcanic activity, and the sun not behaving normally.
Yeah, and of course that's what we got right now. We've got increase in earthquakes and volcanism. We've got the sun going into a grand solar minimum, and of course we're going to have the human effects of humans getting desperate and acting against each other with weapons of mass destruction, which people don't quite realize with biological, chemical, and nuclear weapons. I mean, just stepping back, and this is just pure speculation. We've had a pandemic. We got different countries developing biological weapons. I mean, it is a possibility that somebody could release something rather bad. We know that the Russians during the Cold War developed enormous quantities of anthrax, weaponized, bubonic plague, and smallpox. And their smallpox is a very, very nasty type of smallpox. It blisters your intestines from the inside. And it's, I don't know, what is it, 80% fatal, maybe something even worse than that. And of course, anthrax is, if you breathe it, uh, it's 99% fatal if it's properly milled. If you mill it from 1 to 5 microns, if you mill these particles and you use a transport plane with a hose to spread that into a cold air, stable cold air mass, the attack is called a polar outbreak attack. We've got stable cold air masses in the north of Canada in the winter. That stable cold air mass comes down into the Great Plains, fills up North America from the Rockies on to the eastern coast. It's estimated they could infect with anthrax a third of the population, which would mean a third, 30% or more of the people dying in one anthrax attack. So this is the kind of population reduction measures you could see in a war. And of course, there's nuclear weapons as well. But those can be dirtier depending on how they're used.
Yeah, Jeffrey, I wanted to swing back for a second because we were on something there with you're talking about Africa and Europe declining and civilizations societies just disappearing. And then, Ransom, you were talking about Central America, South America, up into what is considered Southern North America here in the American lower 48. Well, I jumped over because I'm a little familiar with Chinese dynasties and further back, because that's one thing I mapped out was the collapse of Chinese dynasties. Because the mandate from heaven's removed from the emperor, meaning they couldn't feed their people, they couldn't protect their people. So the people said, well, the heavens are no longer giving you the mandate to rule. If you can't even feed us, you no longer have the blessings from heaven to look over us. So you're out. So they call it the mandate from heaven. So 3 kingdoms right around 280 AD, and that 3 kingdoms shattered into 16 kingdoms by 439 AD. And then we start to get into the southern and northern dynasties. So here's the whole thing. It was about invading armies, or they called them nomads. And where do these people just come from looking for all these resources with such vast military capabilities to wipe out what you consider Chinese emperors at that time with the different private armies that they'd had? Like, you just don't go in. It's nigh impossible for that. That has to be such an overwhelming force. Now, where are all these like Mongols coming from, or all these, raiders, as they called them, that came through defeating army after army? They just call them nomadic groups, but they don't even have a name. They just say nomadic groups from the north. Well, I thought the wall was there. Again, so how do you just get nomads from the north coming in and absolutely just steamrolling over everything that was at the height of, Chinese were, when Paris was like a dirt shack on the river, there were already massive, vast cities across China. The comparison of the length of time of 4,000 years of time, and Paris hadn't even been founded when that whole historical area was thousands of years old. I mean, there's some disconnects in history here on what we're told, but
there are a few things you can count on in a major disaster. Having your water supply cut off is one of them. With the Alexa Pure Emergency Water Bank, you'll have months of drinking water in your home. Everyone else will stand in line waiting to get just a few bottles. It's one of the easiest, most affordable ways to store emergency water, and it takes up hardly any space. The Alexa Pure Emergency Water Bank includes 1 BPA-free liner, comes with a siphon pump for extracting water, fits just about any bathtub, large or small, fills quickly in 30 minutes or less, holds up to 65 gallons of water, and keeps water fresh for up to 16 weeks, holds about 2 months of water for one person. A person can generally survive without water for about 3 days. However, the exact amount of time depends on many factors, including age, activity level, and overall health. Don't gamble with your life and well-being. Being prepared is easier than ever with Civilization Cycle and Alexa Pure.
How does a massive dynasty go and get overrun by nomads, and then it shatters further afield because, again, it fragmented because of famines and diseases? That
Same thing in the Roman
exactly. So now
Empire, by the way.
We're talking about the entire planet at that time got upset by something.
Yeah. You said the date 439 was one of the dates, and Rome was sacked in I believe it was 411. Rome was sacked by the barbarians, so that's pretty close in time. So, and the thing is this whole area from
well,
what
I'm
is
say,
today,
excuse me, that the 16 kingdoms ended in 439, so it ran through that same period you're talking about.
Yeah. So see, the first barbarian tribes, the Germanic tribes, crossed the Rhine. I think it was 407 when they just started pouring across into what is today France. They called it Gaul, the province of Gaul back then. And that's when it sort of the unraveling began, because Gaul was never recovered by the Roman Empire. Then they went on to Spain. Then they went on to Africa. The Vandals were a Germanic tribe that went through Africa. They invaded, and finally in 411, they came down and they took Italy, northern Italy, and they sacked Rome. And so you got the same thing happening in China, because if you go between Rome and China, there's this vast stretch of territory, Central Asia, what is now Russian, Siberia, Eurasia. These are all people who live on horseback. They have animals. They take care of sheep, cattle, camels, whatever. They're people who live this kind of existence, a herding existence, but they're extremely effective fighters, because most of these people trained to fire bow and arrow from the back of a horse. The Huns were famous for this. The Mongols were famous. All of these people that lived on horseback, that lived in that area. And because they lived on horseback, they were highly mobile. And a regular army of armored soldiers, they could ride around them in a circle and plug them full of arrows. But why would they do it? They'd stay out in their domain hunting and whatever. But when it's cold, what happens? Their food supply dies. So where do they go? They go to Rome, they go to China, they go looking for land. And in the case of Rome, you know, the Huns had pushed in just before then into Europe, and nobody could really stop them hardly. And of course, when the Huns pushed on the Germans went on into the Romans. And that was part of what was going on at the end of the 4th century. So in the last decades of the 4th century. So yeah, and so you see, it's not surprising that a country like China today, with 1.3 billion, or if it's only a billion, if they're lying about their population numbers, you can see the problem they have. If the climate changes suddenly, when even now they don't have enough land to feed themselves, and Asia is a very dry continent, and then you've got Russia. Russia is so far north, people don't realize. If Moscow were in the North American hemisphere, in North America, it would be on Hudson's Bay. And that's the largest city in Russia. That's how far north it is. So we don't really grasp how cold it could get that far. And St. Petersburg is further north. That's the second largest city in Russia, further north than Moscow. So if something happens to the climate, how are these people going to feed themselves? Same thing with the Chinese. So the Russians and Chinese, of the people in the world, this is perhaps more life and death for them, because the United States is not as far north as Europe. It has the upper Midwest, but there's Florida, there's places south, there's California that are not. It doesn't snow really in the lowlands in California. So these food growing areas remain. But for countries like Russia and China, it's not so simple.